Hello! In this video, I'll walk through the steps on how to make one of these hand-knotted macrame wristlets. These wristlets have a laser engraved leather band, and the leather band has two purposes. Number one, to add a bit of uniqueness, and it also hides the macrame rope which goes through the loop in the claw clip. If you don't have a laser, I'll leave the link where you can purchase these leather bands in our shop. And if you do have a laser, I'll be creating a secondary video walking through the steps of how we engrave those leather bands. Now, first step, let's get knotting. All of the materials that I'm using are listed in the description. You can see the first thing we have to do is attach the cord to our claw clip. I've got 4 lengths of macrame rope. I have 2 that are 50 inches long and then folded in half, so about 25 inches long. And then 2 that are 120 inches long. So first step, making a lark's head knot on the clip with the 2 shorter pieces of rope. Going to fold that rope in half and then loop the tail through from the back of the circle on the clip. Do the same thing with that second piece. So fold the rope in half, loop through the back of the ring on the claw clip, and pull the ends, the tails of the rope through. And I've got a little extra thread there, a thread that came untwisted, and that's not a big deal. Just put that back in place. So pull the tail through, and then I'm going to pull the end of that nice and tight and make sure my lark's head knot is tight on the ring. So then I'm going to take one of the longer lengths of rope. Again, these are about 120 inches long. I'm going to line up the end of one side of the rope and then fold it to be the same length as the 2 shorter pieces of rope. So now I've got one side that's 25 inches long and then a very long tail on the other side. The long tail, or the long side of that piece of rope, is going to be the one we're going to do all the knotting with. The shorter pieces are what goes down the center and what the knots actually loop around. So same thing, I'm going to make a lark's head knot. I want the longer strand to be on the outside when I pull that knot through. So I'm going to go get the tail. I made a loop through the back. I'm going to pull the tail. And then tighten that on the ring of the clip. And if you notice, that long tail is on the outer side. I'm going to pick up my next piece of rope. I'm going to do the same thing. Going to measure the length. It should be about 25 inches. Going to keep one end consistent with the end of all of my other short rope lengths. Make a fold. And then loop that on. Loop that through the back of the circle of the claw clip. And again, I want the long length to be on the very outside edge. So bring the tail through. So you've got 6 pieces of rope that are about 25 inches long and 2 that are 95 inches long. And the 2 that are 95 will be on the outer edges. And again, those are the ones that are going to be doing the knotting work. The other 6 are just going to be kind of down the center. So we'll speed things up. Let me Gonna get the spaghetti rope in position here. Those long cords are on the left and the right side. And in order to secure the working piece to my tabletop, I just take a small extra piece of cord, cut that, knot that and make a loop, and attach the claw clip to that loop and then tape the loop down to my working surface. Just gonna use some regular old masking tape. This is, I think, 2-inch wide masking tape that I'm going to secure that clip down with, and then I'm also going to do the same thing on the tail end. You really want that working piece snug to your tabletop or to your working surface to make sure that it doesn't move around. If it moves, it's much more difficult to get a tight and even knot. So the first square knot that we're going to make is simply going to keep all those lark head knots at the top together and connected. So I'm going to place my left hand cord in kind of a triangle over the top. I'm going to take my right hand cord over the top of the left hand cord that's crossed over and under the middle. And then I'm going to pull that really nice and tight, because I want those lark's head knots to be down in the bottom half of the ring on the clip. So I do work that a little bit. I try to make sure that's nice and tight. And then this knot, we only do about half of the square knot. And then I'm going to do a secondary knot from the left hand side and leave it about 3/4 of an inch up from the top of the initial knot that I made, or from the lark's head knots. This will be so that that leather band can go around all of the rope, all of the macrame cord, without getting too bulky. So we want to try to keep as little amount of bulk there as possible. So we make a gap, essentially. This is probably the toughest knot to make because it wants to go a little bit loose. That's okay. Try to tighten that down the best you can, and then the second knot is going to come from the right hand side, and this is the actual square knot. So that's one square knot. And we'll go through that again. Actually, we'll do that a number of more times. So make kind of like a 4 with the left hand rope on top of the center. I'm going to cross over and then go under everything with the right hand rope, and that's half of the square knot, so we're going to tighten that down. And then we go in reverse with the right hand cord over the top, backwards 4, over the tail, and under everything, and back through the middle. And as I work through it, I kind of work and tighten those, squeeze the knots together to make sure it's nice and even and it looks nice and smooth. So that's half of a knot. That was left to right, and now I'm going to go right to left. And I'll speed this up. We've got quite a few knots to make. You could go through and count your knots if that's the easiest way, or if that's the way you prefer to determine the length of your wristlet. I prefer to just measure it once I get about I don't know, 2/3 of the way complete. At this point, let's take a break and measure, see how much further we have to go, how many more knots are required. So I generally take a wristlet that I know I like the size of. This one that I'm making today is going to be smaller. I think it's about 5.5 inches from the end of the clasp to the end of the wristlet. I usually add a little extra distance to that because, you know, it's not a straight line. You've got a curve in that wristlet shape. So I'll probably make this full length, top to bottom, about 5 3/4. So that will be the fold point of the wristlet. So I usually take a piece of masking tape and I will mark that on my working surface, 5 3/4. So let's do that. All right, so marking the 5 3/4 midpoint. And now I really only care about how much knotting gets me to the midpoint. So in this case, it's 3 1/4. So 3 1/4 of knots to the midpoint, and then I need to take a look at that and say, well, overall, I then need 6 1/2. So I can either measure down 6 1/2 and mark that line, or I can measure from that midpoint another 3 1/4. And that will be the total distance. So 3 1/4 from that midpoint line, or 6 1/2 total of my knotted cord. So now I know I need to keep knotting until I get to that second mark. And once I'm there, I'm done the knotting process. We'll speed this up and move it along. So I've got my last knot in here now. I usually like to go just over my line because I don't like when my wristlets are shorter than I expect them to be, and I have to go and tape everything back down. So this looks good. I'm going to untape it and pull it from my working surface. I'm going to fold it in half and make sure I like the length of the wristlet size. And it looks good to me compared to the one that I've done previously, so I'm happy with that size. I'm then going to cut off a bunch of the excess of the macrame rope. I'm going to take one of those long pieces of masking tape that I had been using to secure the strings to my working surface, and I'm actually going to wrap that around the cord. Now the point of this is to keep all of those cords together so that we can get them through the ring in the clip loop without having a lot of fraying or issues. So I'm going to take that, wrap it around, and then I'm going to cut right in the center of that taped macrame cord. I'm going to cut that at an angle to give it a little bit of a point to make it easier to fit through the ring. Now for this next step, I like to have a small hair elastic ready and close by, and we're going to take the wristlet. Sometimes it seems like there's one way it likes to fold more than another, but it doesn't really matter which direction. Just kind of fold that in half at your middle point. And you're going to take the point of the end of the rope where you put the masking tape around. You're going to work that through the circle on the clip. It's going to be a little bit tough. Now you've got the end through. I like to take all of the ropes and try to smooth them and make them as straight as possible, meaning if one of the cords is on or from the right hand side, I want it to stay on the right side. You can see I've got one cord that wants to cross over the middle, and I actually want to make sure that it stays in a straight line. Right side stays on right side, left side stays on left side. So it's a smooth wrap around the top or through that circle ring. And then you want to make sure that everything is pulled down and tight. No gaps. None of the ropes are causing extra loops. You want it to look like a nice smooth, like if you were doing your hair, like a nice smooth ponytail. So once you have that in position, I line up the tops of the square knots with each other so that they're level. And then I put that elastic band on to help secure it. And then I can still work it a little bit. I can still move it, make it smooth and even. Make sure I don't have any gaps or loose pieces of macrame cord. So once I'm happy with how that looks, you can see it's pretty smooth. Got one side that's got the tails and one side that doesn't. I am then going to take a piece of nylon thread and really secure all of the rope down together. So maybe that's about a 20-inch piece of that nylon thread. You could really use any type of synthetic thread. This is for jewelry making specifically, like beading specifically. So I take that thread, I wrap it around a few times, I pull it as tight as I can, and then I'm going to make a square knot in this. So I'm going to loop it and go under. And pull that tight. Try to keep it secure. And then do the opposite and over, under, knot. If you don't know how to do this specific type of knot or you're struggling with it, just knot this as best you can. The most important thing is that cord is tight, and we will add a little bit of Gorilla Glue or Super Glue on the ends of this so that it can't come loose. So now everything's tied down. We're actually going to take those loose ends and cut them off. So I cut them up close to the rubber band. It looks like it got a really bad haircut, but that's okay. We're not gonna ever see that again anyway. So we're gonna take that. I do like to take just a little bit of Gorilla Glue and secure that so I don't have to worry about it coming undone. I don't use a ton. I just glue the ends. I glue the loose ends where we just gave it the little haircut. I glue the knot to make sure that that's not gonna come loose. And I just put a small, thin film of Gorilla Glue. You can use super glue. Likely any glue is probably fine. We're just trying to knot it up so that nothing comes loose. And I let that dry. If you do put a good amount of super glue on there, it does take a bit to dry, so let that sit and dry completely. So now it's time for my favorite part of the process, which is dip dyeing the wristlet. The very first thing I do is wrap the top of the wristlet in either just a little piece of aluminum foil. You could use some clear plastic wrap, something to protect the surface, mostly from your glove hands. You may get a little bit of dye from the process on your hands or on the gloves that you're using. And I've just found that if I put a little protective wrap up there, I'm much better off and much more likely to not get an accidental bit of dye or drip of dye on the top. So then the next thing I do is you want to saturate that wristlet. You can do it in tap water, you can do it in hot water on the stove. It's up to you. The main thing is you want to rinse any of that starch out of the fabric. So then I get a new pot. I'm going to fill it with hot water. As the water's getting warm, I add a bit of Dawn. I recommend following the instructions on the Rit Dye packaging. They have instructions for the quantity of dye and also the amount of soap and salt that you need to add to the water. So the first dye that we're going to use is this Denim Blue. I'm going to add my dye to the hot water on the stove. I've got gloves on. I'm going to stir that gently. You can see it's foaming a little, and that's because of the soap that you put in. So the first thing I'm going to do is slowly dip the wristlet in. Now I do slowly dip it in. I don't spend a lot of time in the dye bath, and then I'm going to immediately take it over to my sink and start rinsing it in some hot water because I want that light effect. I want a very light edge, and if I can get some of the dye out of the fabric initially, that's great. I might do that a number of times. So I might go back to the pot on the stove, and dip dye in the hot, and swish it around quite a bit to make sure that it's getting all the way through the fibers and the knots. And again, if I find that, to me, it's obviously all personal preference, but I find to me that that top edge is getting a little bit too abrupt and I want it to be softer, I can take it over to the running water and I let it run and almost desaturate a bit. So I might do that one more time. So I'm going to speed up the video a bit. The second color I'm going to use is then Indigo. Just a little bit of Indigo. And this time I'm not going to dip it in quite so far. I'm only going to dip the lower portion because otherwise I don't get that gradation. So I continue that for about 15 minutes. It's nice and saturated at this point. I really like the color and the variation. So then the last thing I'm going to do is add just a little bit of gray. You could use black. Totally up to you on color. Again, you can also measure these out. That's what Rit Dye recommends, is measuring them to be specific so that you know what your color is going to be. I find that a little bit tough because of the size of my pot. I'm not working with too much water. I think I'm in maybe a 2-quart saucepan. So then on my last stage, on my last color, I'm simply just going to leave the very, very bottom of this. Still want to get a good saturation, so I am going to move it quite a bit, but I only have the very bottom of the wristlet in the dye. So you can kind of see there. And it will look darker as you're dyeing while it's wet than it will with the final piece. I believe the longer that you leave it in the water and the longer you let it sit, the darker it will be. So this is what it looks like with all of the colors. At this point, I'm going to dump that water, clean out my pot, and add in the Rit ColorStay Dye Fixative. So this is going to let the dye set in the material. I think, to me, this helps with not losing so much color as I'm rinsing. So essentially, it helps the dye bite into the fabric. It prevents a lot of leaching. You will see that some of the dye will come out in the water, so the water will turn a little bit blue. But I do let that soak, and I come and agitate it a little bit, stir it around. And I want it to be in that fixative for about 20 minutes or so. As a side note, I only use this pot for dyeing wristlets or using dye. I do not use the same pots I use for cooking for this dye process. So the last step in dyeing is to rinse the wristlet with fresh water. You want to make sure you get all of the fixative out of there, and then you need to let it sit and dry for 12 to 48 hours. Ultimately, if you get it in front of a fan, that can shorten your drying period. And once the wristlet's fully dry, it's now time to add the leather wrap. And I do use a 1mm cord, wax cord. The one I have right now is from Mandala Crafts. I did get it from Amazon. And you can see here an example of 3 different types of leather bands that we have. This is a finished one. This is a hammerhead shark. It's got the laces already on it, and now we need to lace the turtle band. So I'm going to take about a, 20-inch piece of this 1mm cord and start threading it through the first hole of the turtle band. And then I'm going to thread it through from the outside to the inside on the top hole on the opposite side. Grab both ends and pull that, not super tight, but maybe so there's a 1-inch gap of that thread. Makes it easier to get it on the collar of the wristlet when we're done. So I'm going to take the same side and then loop out from the inside to the outside and then back towards the inside. Now I'm going to pick up the thread from the first hole and go back from the inside to the outside and thread around from the outside to the inside. And then one more time, I'm going to pick up the opposite end of the thread, go from the inside to the outside and back towards the inside. And you'll see there now, both ends of my string or of my cord are coming to from this, from the same side. They're both right next to each other. So then when we go through and knot them, I'll be able to knot them very easily and it will not get lumpy. So my leather band here is ready. I'm going to slip it over the top of the wristlet so that the 2 loose cords are, facing away from the clasp. And then I'm going to kind of pull that tight, push it together so that the ends meet. And I'm also going to use this leather craft cement that I got from a company called Buckle Guy, which is actually where I've gotten all of my leather, the raw leather bands. So I'm just going to put a small dot amount of glue on the inside of there, kind of rotate it around a little bit, move it around and make sure that it's got good adhesion to the rope and to the leather. I'm going to also put another little drop on the other side. And again, working that into the leather a bit, moving it around a bit, making sure I don't have too much because I don't want it to spill out over the top. And now I'm going to hold that band snug against the wristlet. And I'm going to start working the 1mm cord and tightening each of those loops that I've made. So you've got to kind of work each one individually, pulling from the top down, make one loop tight and then the next one. So once all the loops are tight, I can pull the 2 loose ends making sure they're tight, and I'm just going to tie 2 knots in the end of this string, like you were going to tie a knot in a shoelace. The type of knot is not super critical because we will put a dot of SuperGlue or Gorilla Glue on the end so that it can't come apart. We're just going to snip the loose ends and we'll be done. So then we want to make sure the knot is secured behind the leather. So we're going to take a pen, in this case it's a tool I use for the leather burnishing, putting the adhesive on, and just kind of smush that knot in so it can't be seen. So in the end, I take a tiny bit of Gorilla Glue, hit just a dab of that on the very end of the knot, just to make sure that that knot's never coming loose. And here's the final product. You've got your dip dyed leather wrapped wristlet. If you found this video helpful, please give us a like, hit subscribe, and we hope to see you back for the next one. Thanks for watching.